Okay, welcome to Psych 232, Theories of Personality. Today we're talking about Abraham Maslow, which falls within the humanistic approach. I don't know if you guys remember humanistic theory from Psych 101, but humanistic theory basically says that humans are basically good. We strive, we have free will, and we strive basically to achieve our full potential. Under the right circumstances, we strive for things that are good, not only for ourselves, but also for society. That's the humanistic approach. It's a humane way of looking at human beings. It's a nice way of looking at human beings. So that's Maslow right there. Let's get started. So Maslow's approach to personality. Remember from Psych 101, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's what this theory is about, right? According to Maslow, we have 5 innate needs, 5 needs that are innate. In other words, we're born with them. We can't help it. It's just who we are, right? And he organized them in a hierarchy. Some of these needs are more important than others, and they need to be satisfied first, according to Maslow. And here are the needs: your physiological needs, your safety needs, belonging needs, esteem needs, and then self-actualization needs. And we're going to talk about each one of these in detail. Okay, you probably heard about them before, like I said, from Psych 101. So according to Maslow, the needs are what he called instinctoid. They have a hereditary component, right? It's just part of who we are. We're born that way. We're programmed that way. We're genetically predisposed, you know, to, of course, seek those physiological needs, those safety needs, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization needs. So we can't help it. It's just part of who we are, okay? We are equipped with the needs at birth. We have them from birth, but the way we satisfy them, that is what is learned. Okay, so we're born with these needs, but the way we satisfy them, that we can learn from parents, from society, from whatever's around us, okay, from our experiences. The needs can be affected, overridden, okay, by learning, social expectations, fear of disapproval. So we can learn, for instance, to pursue some needs to a greater extent than others. We can learn to basically ignore some and deny some of those needs. Based on what we learn, you know, from other people, our expectations, or because we're disapproved of, let's say by parents, by society, by peers, or whatever it is. Okay, so these needs can be affected by the environment, okay, the social environment, but the need is there. We all feel it, but they can be affected by the environment. So let's talk more about this. More about the hierarchy of the 5 innate needs. So the needs are arranged from strongest to weakest, the more basic ones being stronger. Okay, and like I said, you guys, the PowerPoint is a little bit kind of messed up here. That's not the way it looks when I uploaded it. It's just the presentation messes it up a little bit. Okay, the alignment and things like that. So the needs are arranged from strongest to weakest. Okay, the strongest, you know, being the physiological needs. Okay, and we'll talk about why those are the strongest. And the weakest being the need for self-actualization. Okay, the last one. Okay, lower needs must be partially satisfied before the higher needs can become influential. That's why the lower needs are stronger. Okay, so your physiological needs come first. Those are the strongest. If you don't meet your physiological needs, none of the other ones are going to matter. If you don't eat, right? If you don't drink water, if you don't get enough oxygen, you're going to die, and none of those other needs are going to matter. So the physiological needs, those first needs, they're the strongest ones. Then comes safety and the other ones that we'll talk about in a moment. The lower needs must be satisfied first. Otherwise, the other ones make absolutely no sense, according to Maslow. And we are not driven by all needs at the same time. Okay, only one need dominates personality at a time. Okay, so these needs dominate our personality. So if you're hungry, if you're starving, for instance, your personality, your behavior, your thinking, right, it will be dominated by the need for food, by the search for food. You're going to be trying to survive, and you're going to steal, you're going to beg, you're going to do whatever you need to do to get food, right? If you're starving, you might even kill someone or resort to cannibalism. We'll talk about things like that. Okay, so yes, if you're starving, if you're hungry, right, nothing else matters. You're going to behave just like an animal. You're just going to be seeking food until you get it, until that need is satisfied. And you're going to do whatever you can when your life is on the line. Let's keep going. More about these 5 innate needs, right? The order of the needs can be changed according to Maslow, right? It depends on what's happening. Like in a recession, right? When there's a recession, a lot of people lose their jobs. All of a sudden, people don't have enough money to make ends meet, right? So in a recession, people may change from being driven by esteem needs to physiological needs. So when you lose your job and money becomes scarce, right? No longer will you care about that nice car. You will probably sell it if you have to. No longer will you care about those clothes or those other things, those esteem needs, right? Those materialistic needs that just make you feel good, right? You won't care about those things anymore. Now what's going to matter is, you know, do you have enough money for food? Do you have enough money for shelter? That's what's going to matter. Your esteem needs won't affect your personality anymore. You won't care about those. Another example is someone may decide to focus on esteem needs and put off belonging needs. Esteem needs we'll talk about in a moment, but esteem needs include those things that make us feel good when we have them. It could, you know, could be a nice car, you know, a nice house, nice clothes, but it also includes things like, for instance, the need for achievement, like getting that degree, that diploma, getting that promotion, right? Things like that. Someone may decide that they're going to focus on those things. They're going to focus on their career. They're going to focus on, you know, getting a good job and working hard, right? So they can get that, you know, basically that money that will get them all those other things, right? The nice car, the nice house, all those things, right? And put off belonging needs and decide they don't have time to date. They don't have time for friends. They don't have time for family. They're just going to work hard so they can achieve those things. Okay, that's another example of how the needs can be changed. Let's keep going. We'll talk about these needs specifically in a moment. You know, in talking about how it works, I always have to describe the needs a little bit, but we're going to talk about them specifically in a moment. And I'm probably going to repeat myself, okay? Because, you know, some of the examples already came up. The lower needs are called deficit or deficiency needs. Remember, the lower needs are the ones that are stronger, right? Like for instance, the physiological needs, right? You need to eat, you need to drink, right? You need oxygen, things like that, right? So the lower needs are called deficit or deficiency needs because they're necessary for survival. If you don't eat, if you don't drink, if you don't get enough oxygen, you're going to die. They're necessary for survival. Your safety needs are also, you know, part of those lower needs. If your safety needs aren't met, you're going to also die. Okay, so they're necessary for survival. So these lower needs are greater in strength, greater in priority than the higher needs. Like I said, they have to be satisfied first. Okay, and they appear earlier in life. Okay, the higher needs appear later, right? The need to eat and drink and, you know, and breathe and get oxygen, all that stuff, it's present from the moment you're born. And even the need for safety. As an infant, when you're left alone, you cry, you don't like it, right? The need for safety is there. The higher needs come later. Your social needs, right? Well, not your social needs, but your esteem needs, you know, wanting to achieve something, self-actualization, that will come later. Okay. So physiological needs arise in infancy. We know that, right? Belonging and esteem needs arise in adolescence, right? Those belonging needs, you want friends, you want, you know, family, you want to be with somebody, right? I would say they arise before that, but they probably are stronger during adolescence. Your esteem needs arise in adolescence. I would definitely agree with that. You know, during adolescence, that's when you care more about how you look and the clothes you wear, right? And maybe the kind of smartphone you have, and if you can afford a car, you know, driving a car that represents who you are. Those are esteem needs. And maybe wanting to get an A, wanting to get that degree, right? That happens in adolescence. When you're a kid, you don't really care too much about those things. Okay, so those needs arise in adolescence. And the need for self-actualization arises in midlife, right? 40s, maybe 50s, right? Maybe even later. That's when self-actualization arises. That's when it's more possible to achieve that. That's when you have a greater sense of what's going on, right? To actually achieve that. And we'll talk about that. Let's keep going. The higher needs are a bit different. The higher needs, Maslow called growth or being needs. So these are needs that are not necessary for survival, They have more to do with growth. They have more to do with you becoming who you're meant to be, right? Being needs. They have more to do with who you are. They're lower in strength and priority than the lower needs. You don't need them for survival. If you don't self-actualize, you're not going to die, okay? They're not as important as the lower needs. When they are satisfied, however, when the higher needs are satisfied, they lead to improved health and longevity. So when you do achieve self-actualization, you feel physically and mentally healthier, and you're likely to live longer. They lead to contentment, happiness, fulfillment, right? You're happy, right? You feel fulfilled. You feel like you're living a full life when you achieve self-actualization. And Maslow also said that, yes, these higher needs require better external circumstances. For you to self-actualize, for instance, your social, economic, well, you need to have your social, economic, and you need to live within a certain environment, all right? Where you have, your social needs are met, right? Economically, you're doing okay. You have a certain political system in place, okay? Let me give you an example. If you live in a place where you don't have freedom, for instance, you don't have the freedom to marry who you want and have, and befriend whoever you want, right? Your social needs aren't being met, right? Or your economic needs aren't being met. You live in that kind of society, right? Where there is no upward mobility, where you're either poor or you're part of the ruling class, and that's about it. Political circumstances. If you live in a place where, like I said, where there's no freedom, there's a dictator, right? And you're told what to do and what to think, and your freedom is greatly restricted, then according to Maslow, you probably won't be able to achieve the highest need of all, which is self-actualization. You won't be able to become who you're meant to be because you're basically enslaved. You're not free. The lower needs you can still meet, right? In those other circumstances, but it will be more difficult. But the higher needs require better external circumstances than the lower needs. The lower needs, think about it this way, okay? When you're just satisfying your lower needs, you're behaving like an animal, okay? And, sure, you might not be doing well, but you do whatever you can to survive, to get that food, water, that oxygen, to feel safe, right? So you need better social, economic, and political environment for the higher needs. That's what Maslow said. Okay, and it makes sense. In a country where you're not free, you're not going to become who you were meant to be or everything you can be. You're not going to achieve your full potential. And there's a lot of people who live in countries like that, who live in societies like that. So let's talk about these needs. I mentioned a lot about them already. You've heard about them before, but let's talk about them. So remember, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the first need, which is at the bottom of the pyramid, right, are called your physiological needs. This is your, these are the lower needs. They're higher in strength and priority. So your physiological needs need to be satisfied first, okay? You need food, you need water, you need air. I talked about that. If you don't get enough food, you're gonna die within probably 3 weeks. If you don't get enough water, you'll probably die within 3 days. And if you don't get enough air, you'll probably die within, 5 minutes or something like that. That's just the way it is. The body needs those things. And if you don't get them, you're going to die pretty quickly. So physiological needs are at the bottom of the pyramid. It is the lowest need, but it's also the one that's most necessary for survival and therefore the strongest. These physiological needs will direct behavior when they're not met. Okay, so when you are starving, you're going to do anything you can to get food. You will kill, you will steal, you will kill somebody and eat them if you have to. Some of you guys may not believe me, but there's been circumstances like that. I think it was back in the 70s, there was this plane that crashed in the Andes, and there's a movie based on it. I forget the name of the movie, this plane crashed in the Andes, and I think it was a team of soccer players, okay, that this plane was carrying, crashed in the Andes in the snowy mountains. And some people survived the crash and some people did not. They were in a very remote area and they were not rescued for months. For months, they had to try to survive there. There was a lot of snow, so they got water. And obviously there's oxygen, but there wasn't much food. So they, for the sake of survival, resorted to cannibalism after a while. They ate the dead bodies of the people who did not survive. And that's what they had to do. And you might think that you would never do that. But if you were starving, if your life was on the line, you would probably do anything you can to survive. That's how strong the physiological needs are. Once the needs are met, they stop directing behavior. If you're not hungry, if you're not thirsty, you're not going to be concerned with it. You're not going to be looking to, steal, right? To rob somebody for food, right? To kill somebody so you can eat them. You're not going to be even looking for a restaurant or opening the fridge. It doesn't matter. Once those needs are met, they are completely satisfied. They mean absolutely nothing to you until they come up again. That's the way physiological needs are. When they're satisfied, they no longer affect your behavior. Other things will affect your behavior, according to Maslow. They have a strong biological component, of course, that produces a drive when they're not met. So when you haven't had enough food, that produces the drive known as hunger. And that's a state of tension. And it's very unpleasant and will make people do anything. When you haven't had enough water, that produces thirst. That's a drive that motivates behavior. Okay, those are your physiological needs. Let's keep going. Next come your safety needs. The safety needs are basically the need for safety, need for security, need for order, the need for stability. Okay, so you need freedom from harm, right? You need regularity to your life. You need to feel safe. Safety needs come second. Okay, still a pretty important need. Okay, because without safety, you're not going to survive either. If you're not safe, that means that anybody can kill you, anybody can harm you, and you're not going to last very long. So we have our safety needs, right? Safety needs are very important for children and neurotic adults, according to Maslow. Children have for children, right? Their safety need is very important, right? Because they're very vulnerable. And adults, of course, their parents usually take care of them to meet those safety needs. So children don't always feel safe for various reasons. They're afraid of strangers, right? Maybe afraid of the teacher, afraid of bigger adults or other kids, right? It's normal. But the adults are there to protect them, to reassure them, to provide order, provide stability, to make them feel better. Neurotic adults behave the same way, according to Maslow. They also don't feel safe. They're always anxious. They're always fearful, always stressed out, always thinking that something's going to go wrong, right? It's really about the safety, according to Maslow, right? They don't trust other people. They just feel that things are not going to work out, and it's the need for safety that isn't being satisfied, according to Maslow. That stress, that anxiety, right? That's why they're neurotic. So both children and neurotic adults require, it says equire, right? Require an orderly, predictable world. Okay, children require, structure, right? They need a home that they can go to regularly. They need to see the same parents, the same people, right? Go to the same class, the same teachers, right? For them to feel okay. And that's the way neurotic adults are as well. They need order, they need stability. Any little change makes them feel very anxious, makes them feel stressed out. They don't like to meet new people. They're neurotic, okay? They don't like when new things, unexpected things come up, like there's a surprise midterm or something like that, a surprise quiz. They freak out, Neurotic adults require more predictability. Children and neurotic adults also, you also have the situation where excess freedom, permissiveness negates structure and order and produces anxiety. If you give your children too much freedom, you're too permissive as a parent, right? Then that means there's not much structure and order, according to Maslow. And they can get hurt and get themselves into scary situations. And that negates their need for safety, produces anxiety, produces fear. Same thing for neurotic adults. Think of someone who basically is so neurotic, psychologically disturbed, that they're institutionalized. So they keep them in this place basically because they can't handle the outside world. They can't handle meeting new people. They can't handle what they perceive as the chaos of the real world. You don't have to be institutionalized, but let's say if you're neurotic, you don't like change. You don't want your schedule to change. You don't want to move. You don't want your job to change. You don't want things to change. You are used to certain things and you remain calm and okay if things remain the same, if they are predictable. If things change, you get stressed out, you get anxious, you don't handle it very well. Okay. For children and neurotic adults, freedom is needed with guidance within the ability to cope and direct behavior. So you need to provide some freedom for your children, but with guidance, right? You take them to the park, right? Maybe they've never been there before. And you walk them over, to the swings or to the slide or whatever it is, the little tower there. And, you play with them at first and you show them what to do, right? And once they know what to do, after a few times that you go with them and you say, okay, Junior, go play over there. I'll sit over here and watch you, right? So you provide some freedom, but with guidance. You're there to protect them, to guide them, to, rescue them if they, if they should get into trouble or help them out. Same thing for neurotic adults, right? They can only handle a little bit of freedom, right? Maybe a little walk out into the garden. Not much, maybe not, and I'm talking about people who are extremely neurotic, who might be institutionalized here. They probably can't handle, going outside, right, into the city or something like that. So they need only a little bit, some freedom, but with guidance. And as they grow and they get better, right, then you can provide them with more freedom. Normal people can sometimes be driven by safety needs. You can also feel neurotic and feel like you're not safe. Okay. For instance, you may be doing fine, and not driven by your safety need, but maybe you get robbed at gunpoint, right? Somebody robs you and basically pulls a gun out of you and tells you, give me your money or I'm going to kill you, right? So you give them your wallet, your purse, whatever, and then they run off and they don't kill you. Well, guess what? You're going to be messed up for a while, probably. You're going to be traumatized, right? Most people, not everybody, but most people probably be traumatized by that. They're going to be very scared. They're going to go home and they're going to make sure all the doors are locked. They're not going to want to be alone. Okay. And they're going to be maybe waking up at night and checking to make sure that nobody's out there. Right. You might even feel that you might need to protect yourself by getting a dog or a gun or something like that. All of a sudden you're being driven by your safety needs because your safety need was violated. Right? So the needs can change depending on what happens to you, what is driving you. If you feel safe, your safety needs are probably not driving you. They're not driving me. I feel pretty safe. In general, this is a pretty safe country. Even the bad neighborhoods are not that bad compared to other places in the world. And mostly we're not being driven by the need for safety. But other people in other parts of the world are being driven by the need for safety. There are people in war-torn countries where there's bombs exploding and gunfire going off, and their houses are being riddled with bullets, and things are getting blown up, and people are dying. And what are those people doing? They're fleeing. They're fleeing their country. They're fleeing their town, and trying to basically get to a place that's safer. And they're trying to go into countries, other countries, maybe safer European countries. They want to come to the US and other countries. And there's a lot of debate about that, about what to do with these people, these refugees, right? Do we let them in? How many? Or do we let them, fend for themselves, right? It's a humanitarian crisis. But they're being driven by their safety needs because they don't feel safe. If they felt safe, they wouldn't be fleeing their home country. Let's keep going. The needs that come next are your belonging and love needs. Remember, the belonging and love needs, according to Maslow, arise, during adolescence. I wouldn't fully agree with that. I think they arise earlier than that. I think you have belonging and love needs from the moment you're born. You want to be with people. But your belonging and love needs are expressed through a relationship with a friend, with a lover, or being a part of a group. I think it's also, your belonging and love needs are also expressed through, having a father and a mother and siblings. Okay, so I think it's present from the very beginning. It's more difficult to satisfy, by the way, your belonging and love needs in an increasingly mobile society. We're increasingly mobile. We have cars, we can drive around, right? We can You know, we can move far away. We can take a plane and go to another part of the country and decide to live in another country if they let us, right? People don't stay in the same place anymore. So it's becoming harder to satisfy these belonging and love needs. You lose friends. Maybe you're growing up together in the same neighborhood, and then your friend moves another neighborhood, maybe hundreds of miles away, or even 50 miles away or 20 miles, but they're not in your same neighborhood anymore. They're not in your same school, and you've lost those friends. Even worse, when you get to high school and then you graduate and people go their own way. A lot of people go to college, different places all over the country, you know, and you lose friends, you lose relationships, you know, you might lose a lover, someone that maybe you could have married, right? That's what's happening. Our society is becoming more and more mobile, okay? And as we do that, as we become more mobile, that disrupts relationships because it's too easy to get away from people. And often we will move because, you know, we want to live in another neighborhood. We go to another school, right? We take on another job, or maybe it wasn't our, you know, it wasn't our decision, but, you know, the business was relocated to another state or even another country. And they tell you, you want to keep your job, you got to move with us. So you move and you leave a bunch of people behind. All those things change. And especially nowadays, they change very frequently. Failure to satisfy your belonging and love needs causes maladjustment. If you don't feel loved, okay, if you don't feel like you're a part of a group, part of a family, you don't have friends, you feel lonely, you feel depressed, you feel miserable and unhappy. That's just the way we are. There are people who say, oh, I don't need anybody. And they're lying. They do. They might be depressed and lonely or maybe angry because somebody has hurt them. But they do need people. Okay. And if you don't have people around you, if you don't have people to love, right, and people who love you back, if you're not around people, if you don't have people, you don't have others, then you're very miserable. You can be the richest person in the world and have everything. But if you're completely alone, you'll probably blow your brains out. That's just the way it is. We need people. Imagine, right? You go off, let's say, and you were one of these first people to colonize Mars, right? And you're off there, over there, and you go as part of a group, right? You can do better as part of a group, but let's say everybody dies except you. What do you think you're going to do after a while? And you have no chance of rescue. You're going to be there forever alone. You're probably going to end your own life. That's what's probably going to happen. We need other people. And without other people, we are miserable and hopeless. That's just the way we are. It causes all kinds of maladjustment problems, depression, loneliness, resentment, anger, right? All sorts of things when we are alone, when we don't feel loved. Let's keep going. We also have esteem needs. Esteem needs, we're talking about those things that make you feel better when you have them. Okay, they're not necessarily necessary for survival, I would say, but you feel better when you have them. So esteem needs are expressed through feelings of self-worth, right? You feel more worthy, right? Self-worth, that comes from others, recognition from others, having more status, more social success. So getting that degree, right? You feel good about yourself, but you don't need that degree to survive, right? Or getting that nice car, right? Buying that house, getting that promotion, that job, all that makes you feel good. These are esteem needs, right? We're also driven by that, but they're not necessary for survival. So they make us feel good about ourselves when we have these things. They raise our self-esteem, okay? They raise our sense of self-worth, right? And self-worth helps us become more competent and productive. When we feel better about ourselves, yes, we are more productive. We feel better, so we get along better with others. We're more likely to do our work and try hard, right? And we're at our best when we feel like we're worthy, like when we feel good about ourselves. When we lack self-esteem, when we don't feel good about ourselves, we feel inferior, we feel helpless, discouraged, right? We're not as productive. We give up more easily. And like I said, esteem needs are expressed through a variety of things. Some of them are more healthy than others. Wanting to achieve, wanting to get that A, right? Wanting to get that degree, that promotion, that job, that's good, right? those are healthy things, but there are other things that are less healthy, that have to do with materialistic things. You know, wanting that nice car, that big house, right? Whatever it is, you know, those nice clothes, that Rolex watch, right? Whatever it is, these are all esteem needs as well, but they're not really that useful. And this is where a lot of people get stuck. They get stuck with the esteem needs. They achieve things, status, recognition, and they just want more and more. They get greedy, not realizing that there is a higher need that few people get to, and that's the need for self-actualization. According to Maslow, very few people get to satisfy this need. It's the highest need of all, but the least necessary. You're not going to die if this isn't met. And you're also not going to die, by the way, if your esteem needs aren't met. So your self-actualization need is the maximum realization of potential, talent, ability. It's when you basically are doing what you feel you were meant to do. When you've achieved your calling, you're using your life to its fullest potential. And that could be any number of things. It could be you know, your job. For some people, their job, fulfills them. You know, for some people, not everybody, most people, not really, but for some people, they feel that, you know, when they're being a teacher or they're being a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it is, right, a firefighter, they feel like they are who they were meant to be. And they're using all their talent, all their potential. You know, and they have achieved they feel that they've achieved their full potential. But that's not the way it is for most Americans. Most Americans don't even like their jobs. About 60% or maybe more of Americans don't like their jobs. Their jobs is just a way to get a paycheck. So their jobs don't complete them. It's not always about your job. Most people need something else besides their job to make them feel complete. For some people, it may be travel, it may be art or music, it may be religion for some people. It may be charity. But usually self-actualizing usually has to do with a mission or a calling, right? Something you do that's beyond yourself. If all your needs are met, except this need for self-actualization, you feel restless, frustrated, discontent. So you have enough food, water, air, right? You feel safe. Belonging and love needs have been met, right? You're married, you have a family, you have friends, you know, you're doing well in that sense. You're also doing well with your esteem needs, right? You have a good job, you've gotten that degree, right? You got a decent car, a decent house, decent clothes, decent lifestyle, right? But, you know, when you get to about midlife, you start asking yourself, right? Is this all there is to life? I feel like there's something missing. I've achieved all of this, but I still feel empty. I feel like there's something missing. That is because you haven't yet achieved self-actualization. There's probably something else that you need to be fulfilled, to achieve your full potential. You're falling short of your full potential. You could probably do more. Necessary conditions, according to Maslow, you need to be free of the constraints imposed by society, right? You need to live in a free society where you're allowed to do what you want and think how you want. A society where you don't have freedom, you're not going to be able to self-actualize. They tell you what to do and how to think, and they put restrictions on you. So you need you need democracy, you need freedom. You need to basically be able to do and think what you want to do, as long as you don't hurt other people, of course, right? But you need to live in a good society, okay? You can't be distracted by the lower needs. If you don't have enough food, right, you're not going to be able to self-actualize according to Maslow. You're going to be driven by the need for food. If you don't feel safe, if you live in a bad neighborhood and you feel like, you know, people are going to kill you, they're going to rob you or whatever it is, you're not going to be able to achieve your need for self-actualization. If you feel lonely and miserable and you feel ignored and you don't have a family, someone to love and love you back, you're not going to be able to self-actualize either, because you're going to be seeking those things. And if you're stuck at the level of the esteem needs, you know, a bigger car, a bigger house, right? Nicer clothes, and you just get greedy, right? then you're not gonna be able to self-actualize. You need to be done with all those things in order to achieve that highest need. Those things should not be distracting you. You need to secure self-image and relationships. You need to know who you are, right? And you need good relationships with people, right? People who love you and, you know, who you love and love you back and treat you well, right? Not people who mistreat you, because that will, you know, make it harder to self-actualize. You need realistic knowledge of your strengths and weaknesses. You need to know who you are. There's some things you're meant for and some things you're not meant for. And you need to know what you are good at and what you are meant for, right? And that will be a clue to what you can do to self-actualize. Let's keep going. Those were the five needs, the hierarchy of needs according to Maslow. Let's talk about other things. Maslow also said that we have what he called cognitive needs. Cognitive needs, the need to know and understand. These needs are innate, according to Maslow, right? From the moment we're born, we're curious. We want to know, we want to understand, right? We want to know what's happening, how things work, right? The need to know is stronger than the need to understand, right? One thing is just the need to know, right? We want to know, you know, what is this, what is that, or what happened to so-and-so, right? Why, the need to understand, that's not as strong, but we often want to know why. And I'll give you an example, right? Remember when you were in, maybe in high school, and you were with someone, and then they decided they didn't want to be with you anymore, and they left you, they dumped you, whatever you want to call it, and you're hurt, you're heartbroken. And you want to know why, right? You want to understand, right? Why? What happened? What did I do? To tell you the truth, often it has nothing to do with you. They just decided that they'd rather move in a different direction, be with somebody else, or that you don't do it for them, that they're different from you. It doesn't always have much to do with you. Sometimes it has to do with the person. But the need to know is even stronger. What if, let's say you lost someone just disappeared and you don't know where they are. It's one thing to know why they disappeared, but you just want to know if they're still alive, right? That would bother you even more. The need to know is even stronger than the need to understand, right? You want to know that someone is alive or dead, right? To understand why, right? That takes less priority. Animals and people are naturally curious about their environment, and knowledge is often sought at great risk. People have explored, you know, different worlds, explored the oceans, explored, you know, the moon, right? And we want to explore Mars, right? All this is very risky. We want to know what's out there, but not just in terms of, you know, of exploration, but also in terms of you know, people and things, right? We want to meet people, right? We want to meet different kinds of people. We want to go to college. We want to travel. We want to know things. And it's risky to do those things, right? When you travel, yeah, you might get stuck somewhere. You might be harmed, or when you go to college, you might fail, right? When you meet new people, they can hurt you, right? Knowledge is sought at great risk, but we want to know things. We want to meet new people, know different things, right? And people are attracted to the mysterious and unexplained, right? That's why people get into things that, you know, have to do with like, you know, astrology, for instance, or reading those, looking at those tarot cards, or want to know their future, and they're caught up in these things that are actually, you know, not supported by science, because they're attracted to things that are mysterious, things that have to do with ghosts or aliens or their future, right? Astrology, things like that, right? They're attracted to those things, often attracted to those things, but often those things are, often a lot of those things just don't have anything to do with science. Okay, and they're just being misled. But there's a reason why we're driven by those, we're attracted to those things, because we have cognitive needs. We want to know, we want to understand. Lack of knowledge produces boredom, lack of excitement, right? When we don't have enough knowledge, when we're no longer curious, right? We're not seeking things, we get bored. We don't feel excited anymore. We're no longer learning. The lack of knowledge is harmful to full personality development. If you don't know who you are, you don't know what's out there, right? You don't know how things work, right? That's not good for your personality, because your personality is, I mean, you don't develop your personality in a vacuum. Your personality has a lot to do with the things you see and learn, and the things you do, things you experience. It's impossible to self-actualize without knowledge, without knowing oneself. and knowing about others and knowing about the world. It's impossible to self-actualize. It's impossible to achieve your full potential. Let's keep going. There was a study done on self-actualizers. Okay, so the people who have self-actualized, what are they like? Okay, so here's the thing. Self-actualizers, according to Maslow, right, are driven by what he called meta motivation or B motivation. I think the B stands for being, right? It's more about who they are, right? So they're motivated to maximize their full potential, right? Their motivation not directed at an object. They're not looking for things, okay? They're more looking for things that define who they are, right? It has to do with being. That's what he called meta motivation. They're driven by different things. They're driven by wanting to be something, right? Not by wanting to get something. Okay, that's more characteristic of self-actualizers. Self-actualizers are driven by meta motivation, or what Maslow called B motivation. Now, there's also D motivation, and D stands for deficit. That's motivation to reduce a deficit directed at a particular object like hunger. So D motivation is when you're motivated to, get certain things. You want food, you want water, right? Maybe you want a nice car, that degree, or whatever it is. You want friends, you want family, you want, whatever it is, right? That's demotivation. That's basically motivation to reduce a deficit. And that's more characteristic of non-self-actualizers. People who haven't self-actualized are driven by those lower needs. They're still distracted by those. They're still driven by those. And because of that, they can't really self-actualize. You need to be free of those things, according to Maslow, in order to self-actualize. Let's keep going. More about self-actualizers. We also have what Maslow called meta needs. Meta needs are what he called the state of growth or being toward which we actually strive, to which self-actualizers strive. So according to Maslow, those that have self-actualized or who are trying to self-actualize are basically attracted to things, to what he called meta needs, things that have to do with growth and being, like truth and goodness, beauty, unity, right? Those kind of things. They're almost like virtues. Page 310, we no longer use the same book, so no, it's not page 310 anymore. But Maslow has a long list of things to which, self-actualizers strive, right? They strive for truth, right? Not myth, not things that are fake, right? Not rumors, right? Truth. There is truth, right? For goodness, for beauty, for unity, for justice, things like that. There's a whole long list of them, and they're virtues. Is basically the way you can think of it. They are virtues. Okay. And then there's meta pathology. Pathology. Pathology means it has to do with sickness, with some kind of illness, right? Metapathology are things that prevent the full development of personality. Metapathology are things that people can also can drive people, but that are really bad and get in the way of self-actualization. And those would be things like mistrust, hatred, vulgarity. According to Maslow, you have to use nice, language as well. You shouldn't be vulgar, right? Black and white sort of thinking. We could put prejudice in there, greed, hostility, right? All those evil, bad things. That's what he called metapathology. And again, that page number isn't accurate anymore. There's more about self-actualizers. Characteristics of self-actualizers. There's other characteristics about them. People who have self-actualized, who have achieved their full potential, they have an efficient perception of reality, according to Maslow. They have a clear, objective, unbiased perception of the world. In other words, they see the world for what it really is. Right? They are not in denial about things. Okay, they're more likely to see what's really happening, the truth, right? They don't ignore one aspect of reality and focus on another, like a lot of people do, right? When they want to believe something, right? They see the real world and what is really there, right? They're not in denial. They're not psychotic. They're not, so biased that they can't see the truth. They can't see reality. They see the real world for what it is. They have acceptance of selves, others, and nature. Yes, they love and accept themselves, and they love and accept others, right? Not racist, not prejudiced, not sexist, right? People who are different, they accept them and they love them, right? They also accept nature. They don't want to destroy nature or just use nature to enrich themselves and destroy the environment at all costs. That's what Maslow said, right? They love themselves, others, and nature, including plants and animals and the environment. They're spontaneous, right? They have simplicity, naturalness. In other words, they're open, they're direct, they're natural, right? They don't hide their feelings, their emotions. They avoid hurting others. They're individualistic. They feel secure. They're genuine. They're truthful. They're honest, right? And they can be spontaneous. They can do things just on the spur of the moment, decide that they want to do something, right? They can lead simple lives, right? They don't need, necessarily a big house or a big car or a bunch of wealth or whatever it is, or a bunch of friends, right? They lead simple, natural lives. They're genuine, they're real. They're not fake. Other things about self-actualizers, they focus on problems outside themselves. They have a sense of mission and commitment. There's something that drives them, okay? Something they believe in. It could be art, it could be music, it could also be religion, it could be God, it could be charity, it could be volunteer, it could be helping others, but they have a mission, something greater than themselves that they seek. They find pleasure and excitement in their work, and they satisfy their meta needs, right? Truth and goodness and, whatever it is, that long list, okay? They have a need for detachment and a need for privacy as well. They need solitude. They need time alone to think. They don't necessarily crave social support. They have relationships. They do have relationships with others, but they don't crave like social support. Like they don't necessarily crave attention from other people and validation from other people. They are secure in themselves. And they're autonomous. They're self-driven. They're not their thinking is not driven necessarily by their culture, by the way they grew up. You can grow up in a culture that's very sexist, very racist, okay? Very bad, okay? Very elitist. But that doesn't mean you have to think that way. And these people who have self-actualized, they think for themselves. They're not necessarily a product of their culture. They are self-driven. They think for themselves. And that's something that's true of very few people. Very few people, they're what they believe, whether it's religion, whether it's the laws they believe in, or the type of life they believe in, or whatever morals they have, whatever music they like, whatever they believe is appropriate, is mostly a result of the kind of things they've been taught. And very few people actually think for themselves. You can be taught some things that are very bad and very wrong. These people are more likely to think for themselves and not be swayed by just popular opinion or just by what other people say. They think for themselves. They have a freshness of appreciation. They perceive and experience the environment with freshness, with wonder, with awe, and appreciate what they have and take little for granted. They enjoy the simple things in life, right? They see the beauty in things, in nature, right? They see the goodness in people and the beauty in people. They're more likely to believe that all people are beautiful, not just certain kinds of people, that we're all good people, not just certain people, right? That nature is beautiful and wonderful, right? They're more likely to appreciate a nice day or just a fresh breeze, right? The smell of a flower, right? You ever heard the expression, you need to stop and smell the roses, right? And not just go through life, just caught up in whatever you're doing, right? Whether it's your work or your books or maybe your smartphone or TV, you need to look around you and appreciate the beauty of what's out there. And people who are self-actualized are more likely to do this, more likely to appreciate what they have and appreciate what's there. There is a lot of beauty, there is a lot of wonder, there's a lot of awesome things around you. And a lot of people don't even see them. And in others as well, it's not just the environment, by the way. Self-actualizers are also more likely to have what we call mystical or peak experiences. It's an experience where you feel completely happy, completely at ease, an experience that kind of almost like a religious experience, an experience of intense ecstasy, right? Where you feel transcendent, you feel powerful, confident, and decisive. Think of a moment in your life when you felt like everything was wonderful, when you felt completely happy. Think about what was happening, right? That moment where you felt everything was wonderful. That was probably a mystical or peak experience. For some people, it is actually a religious experience. For some people, it's when they actually find God, you know, like those people who have done that and they feel wonderful during that time. They feel accepted, they feel loved, and they feel everything is wonderful. It's something like that, but it doesn't have to be about religion or about God. It could be about other things. It could be that you're out there in nature, for instance, and this feeling of calm and happiness comes over you as you're out there, and you have the realization of what really matters in life. And that there's a lot to be thankful for, a lot of wonderful things, right? That's a mystic or peak experiences. I'll give you another example. A lot of people describe as one of their peak experiences, the time when they became a parent, when they became a father or a mother, a wonderful experience, right? Something like that. But it could be a variety of different things. And we all have them. And they're a clue to who we are and what we need to do to self-actualize. But according to Maslow, these people have them more often. Self-actualizers have them more often. They experience these things more often. It's like they live in a different reality and they experience these things more often. Self-actualizers also have social interests. They have sympathy, empathy, kinship, desire to understand and help others. They love other people. They want to help them. They care for them. They don't hate others. They're not racist or prejudiced. They love other people and they want to help them. They want to commune with them. They want to, be involved with them, right? That's social interest. They have profound interpersonal relationships. They have close friends with qualities similar to their own. Profound interpersonal relationships have to do with very close friendships or relationships in which there's someone with whom you have such a great relationship with, and it doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't even have to be someone who is married to you or a significant other. It could be just a friend, someone that you connect so well with that when you're with that person, you find that you have this just intense relationship, like that you have that together you have such a connection. I've experienced that with people, certain friends, certain people. Sometimes it's people of the same sex. Sometimes it's people of the opposite sex. It can be anybody. It could be a friend. It could be a teacher. It could be a lover. It could be your wife, your husband, but a profound interpersonal relationship. When you have it, okay? When you have such a relationship with someone that it is basically, it's just, it's a powerful relationship. Okay, it's just, it's not necessarily sexual or physical. It doesn't have to do with anything, any give or take. It's just a connection. And you can talk with that person, right? They understand you, you understand them. You can have intellectual conversations or other types of conversations. And it's just a very profound, deep relationship that you have. And it doesn't have to do with anything necessarily that's physical, by the way. It could involve those things, but it doesn't have to. And many times it does not. And when you have a friendship with someone like that, by the way, if you do have a significant other, a boyfriend or girlfriend, a wife or husband, and they know about this other relationship, they're likely to be very jealous because it's a very different kind of connection. It's almost like you're soulmates, but you're not necessarily lovers or married or anything like that. Other things about self-actualizers, they have a democratic character structure. Right? They're tolerant, they're accepting of others and their personality. No racial, religious, or social prejudice. I kind of said some about this already in talking about the other things, but yeah, they believe that, people should have freedom and they're free to, think what they want and do what they want as long as they don't hurt other people. They accept people for who they are. They don't think other people are worse or bad because they have a different religion or they're of a different race, a different sex, or whatever it is. They're tolerant and accepting of others. And not everybody is, especially in this divided country that we're living in. That is something that's getting harder and harder to find. There's a lot of bias out there now. We are so divided, not just among race, but among, religion, even within the same religion. Okay, politics. There's a lot of division, a lot of intolerance. We need to remember that we need to be accepting and love other people, no matter how they are or how they think. We have more in common than we think we do. All right. Creativeness. Yes, self-actualizers are more likely to be creative. They exhibit inventiveness, originality in all facets of life. They're flexible, spontaneous, willing to make mistakes and learn from them. So they're themselves, they're creative, right? They find different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking, different ways of expressing themselves. They're not necessarily all artists or musicians or things like that, but they could be. That's a way in which they can be creative. But you can be creative in different ways, okay? But just by how you live your life. But, you know, they're creative, in other words. So they don't just live the way other people live necessarily. They don't just follow rules and conventions. They're creative. You know, they can be flexible. They can change. They can be spontaneous. Resistance to enculturation. I mentioned this already as part of some of the other ones, but yeah, they're autonomous, they're independent, self-sufficient, right? Resist cultural and social pressures. They're governed by their own nature. They could grow up in an environment that taught them that certain people are, you know, better than others, that certain races are superior to others. They can grow up in an environment like that, but they won't necessarily accept that and won't necessarily think that way. They think for themselves. A lot of things that we're taught in society are actually bad things. To not accept that certain people, to not, you know, like certain people, that certain people are better than others. You know, whatever it is. There's a lot of bad things we learn from society and from the media and from TV. We learn that certain people are just more, you know, more attractive than others. And we learn a lot of unhealthy things. These people think for themselves. Like I said before, they're not necessarily a part of their culture. They can you know, grow up in a very religious culture, but don't necessarily have to be religious. They can grow up in India and China and don't necessarily have to think the way the normal Indian or Chinese person thinks, or the average American, whatever you want to call it. They are their own person. They are governed by their own nature, not by social pressure, not by what other things have necessarily told them. Sure, other people can teach you things and guide you, but ultimately, you need to learn to think for yourself. Okay, and that's part of what college is about, by the way, to teach you guys to teach for your to think for yourselves. Okay, and to learn a different way of thinking. And it's more about you know, about growing than it is about, you know, gaining knowledge. It's more about becoming a certain kind of person. It's more about learning how to think than what to think. You know, there's people who criticize, you know, for instance, you know, like, you know, the college education, you know, that, or even in high school, and they criticize and they say that we're teaching you guys, we're telling you guys what to think, and we're turning you guys into liberals and, you know, and just whatever, Democrats, what it is. That's not what we're really doing. What we're really doing is freeing you guys and teaching you how to think, teaching you to think for yourselves. And when you do that, you don't necessarily believe what other people tell you. You can think for yourself and make up your own mind. That's what it's about. It's not about being stuck in one way of thinking or just believing what you're told. And that is liberating. That is freedom. That's it for Maslow's theory. Just a little bit more and we're done. Assessment when it comes to Maslow's theory. What did Maslow do to kind of for assessment to, well, to assess people and determine, you know, what they're like? He looked at biographies. Yes, he did study the biographies of famous historical people like Einstein, Jefferson, you know, Gandhi, Martin Luther King. He looked at people like that and he wanted to learn about what made those people different. Those were people who changed the world, who self-actualized, who did great things. By the way, you don't have to do great things to self-actualize. You just have to live to your full potential. But they are people who have definitely self-actualized. You had a mission and a calling in life, and they did great things. Maslow wanted to know what was it about them that made them different. And that's where he got some of his ideas about self-actualization, that it's a mission, it's something greater than yourself usually, what self-actualizes you. He also did interviews, used free association techniques, which we already talked about, right? He used projective tests where you look at something and you say, you know, what it looks like to you, to study self-actualizers. So he was really interested in these people who have seemed to have achieved something greater, who have self-actualized, okay? And there's also the personal orientation inventory. I'm not sure if it was developed. No, it was not developed by Maslow himself, but it was developed to measure self-actualization. It's a personality questionnaire. You can answer some questions and you score it and it'll tell you to what extent you've achieved self-actualization, to what degree you've done that. Okay. That's the personal orientation inventory. Research on Maslow's theory, yes, there is research that has been conducted about certain aspects of his theory. Those who score high on the personal orientation inventory, remember that's that measure of self-actualization. So those who score high on that are emotionally more healthy, right? They're more creative, have greater sense of well-being. They feel better about themselves, right? Greater academic achievement, greater autonomy, right? And more tolerant, more racial tolerance. Those that score low on the personal orientation inventory are more likely to be alcoholics, more likely to be institutionalized for mental disturbances, mental disorders, more likely to be neurotic, more likely to be depressed. Okay. Other research says that safety, belonging, and esteem needs are negatively related to neuroticism and depression. Yes, if you don't feel safe, if you don't have your belonging needs being met, if you don't feel loved, right? If you haven't achieved esteem needs, if you feel like you haven't achieved much, right? Haven't achieved much success, yeah, you're going to be more neurotic, and you're more likely to be depressed. So the less safety, the less belonging, the less esteem needs, the more neurotic you are, the more depressed you are, is what that research says. Self-esteem tends to be high in childhood. You're relatively happy, right? It drops during adolescence as you assess yourself more and you compare yourself more, and then rises again in adulthood as you achieve some success and raise a family and things like that, and then drops in old age when your abilities start to decline and you also start losing friends and loved ones. That's it, you guys. So I will stop recording.